Hi, everyone, and welcome to Inspiring Boys, Empowering Fathers, and Transforming Lives. Today, we're going to talk about helping boys achieve in our overly feminized education system. Part one. We have lots to talk about here, certainly. So we split it into two podcasts. So here I'm with, as you know, Dr. Jim Brown, my co-host. He's had a significant experience in this subject. Jim spent his career in the education system in pretty much all the areas of the education system in Canada, and also spent some overseas. He's also done research in this area. And has read and done a lot of studies, and he'll refer to those in our discussion today. So, and finally, Jim has lived through this change in the system. So he saw the change, and he can provide us with firsthand experience in the change and the impacts to our sons. Over to you, Jim.
Thank you very much, Linda. It's fascinating because I was a school principal in the early '80s, and then I was a superintendent. And in that time period, a lot of the societal pressure and government pressure and so on was around the issue of the fact that girls were underachieving in the school system. And as a result of it, a lot of changes were made over the next number of years. And it's kind of that kind of area that we need to look at, because if we, in fact, are dealing with boys, boys are having difficulty achieving in a system that's really overly feminized. And I'm not saying it's bad for girls, but it's certainly tough for boys. And I know that from firsthand experience, both working in the school system and other jobs I had related to education, and in my studies and in my writing and so on. So it's really an issue that needs to be looked at. And Linda and I have broken this up into two parts. We started thinking we could do this in one, but we realized it's going to be far too long, and we won't be able to go into the depth we need to. So this is part one, and it's looking at something that dads may be quite concerned about, any parents, as far as that goes, but certainly dads, given the fact that the long-term situation for boys is really not the best, and we need to do what we can to assist boys to deal with that. So, Linda, let's move on.
Okay, so why do we think the education system is over feminized? And we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about some of the statistics, and we're going to talk about what it's like to be a boy and why it is over feminized when they look at it through a boy's eyes. So first of all, as not sure most of you know this, but there is an extreme imbalance in the gender roles. What we mean by that is there are more female teachers than male teachers. And as you can see from the statistics here in elementary school, these are the latest from 2024-25 in the Ontario system. 19% are males and 81% are female. I think, Jim, this used to be a lot more male balanced in the past.
I worked in the early '70s. I worked in hiring teachers, and at that time, at the elementary school level, about 1/3 of the teachers were male. And now it's down to, as you're showing with your statistics there, it's down to apparently 19. And in fact, if you visit your local school, you may find there are no men teachers in it. Or if there are, there might be one or two. And in work I've done in the last number of years, I have talked to school principals and so on who tell me that there are no men teachers in their staff at all. So that means that from the point of view of children, looking at a gender role model, and by that I mean, what are my aspirations for what I will be when I grow up? If in fact all you're seeing are women teachers, then obviously teaching is not a profession that men are likely to want to go into. So that's very, very significant, and the opportunity to rebalance that is very, very difficult. I notice you also have secondary schools on here too, and if I can just carry on, you'll find that the men teachers, and again, I'm going back to hiring in the early 70s. If you go back and look at the reality, the majority, in fact, a significant majority of secondary school teachers were male, and now they make up less than one half. And in both cases, elementary and secondary, the percentage of male teachers is declining and declining rather rapidly because a lot of those male teachers that are still around um, are getting close to retirement and they're not being replaced by young male teachers coming into the profession. So this is significant because it really means the system is overly feminized, and these are the reasons why we really believe it is. It's true of elementary schools, as true as principals rather in elementary schools as well, and also it's increasingly true in terms of the supervisory positions that exist that have gone from having a significant number of men to increasingly very few. So yeah, we think it's overly feminized, and the evidence supports our view on it.
So I think often when you go into a school, the male, the only male or the few males that are in the school are often tend to be the custodian, which is fine. But you also need leaders in the school that are male for the boys to look up to. Um, so that, nothing wrong with the custodians. We have male and female custodians, but we do also need a higher percentage of female teachers and principals, as we talked about. So what would be an example of, things that this would have an impact on? So it impacts on where women end up after post-secondary. Like if we had a female that wanted to be a veterinarian and goes to veterinarian school, and as we know, that's also more female than male, and that has an impact. Because I think we talked about this earlier, Jim. That what happens is the females tend to focus on local pets and things, where male veterinarians focus more on farm animals. And if you've got a shift of females, you're going to have a shortage of perhaps veterinarians that help farmers with their animals. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, and it is really a significant problem because what's happening is as veterinary medicine is increasingly taken over by females, and again, this isn't meant to be negatively critical. It's just the reality of what's happening. The women who go into veterinary medicine tend to be working more office type hours. They tend to be working with in the cities and with small animals, and so that's a real problem for people in the rural community. And as well as that, to give an indication of this whole overly feminized problem, as the number of women vets increases, the number of males that apply to become veterinarians, to go to veterinary school, is decreasing. So we're looking at a long-term problem here, and we're at the early stages of it. And again, once again, a lot of the male vets are older fellows that are closing in on retirement. So the veterinary medicine is going to become largely, as is the case of education and teaching, it's going to become a realm only of women. Now, I'm not objecting to women being vets, but there is a problem in this because we need to have the vets that can deal with large animals and that are willing to work unusual hours. Now, I'm going to move us on here, Linda. This has resulted from in reduced expectations for boys. So part of the problem is boys now don't see these careers as opportunities for them. They don't see themselves becoming educators, and increasingly they don't see themselves becoming veterinarians. And as the system becomes overly feminized, um, women's expectations for students are based on their own experiences, the same as males are for their own experiences, in terms of looking at what do I expect from the boys in this class? Well, if my expectation is that the good students are girls and the bad students, if you like, misbehaving students are boys, then my expectation for those students goes down. And an example I give of this is when I worked not too long ago, when I worked with a school doing some work with school phobic elementary school students. I looked at the number of awards being given to students at the end of the year. Well, there were 11 awards given, and 10 of those went to girls, and one of them went to a boy. And the one that went to a boy went to the top male athlete. And if it hadn't said male, all 11 would have gone to girls. And nobody, staff with virtually all women, nobody saw a problem with that. That to them, that was, of course, what else would you expect? So once you begin to reduce your expectations for boys, and you begin to tell the parents that the boys aren't doing as well as they should, or I shouldn't say that, as aren't doing as well as you might expect as a parent, the parents begin to reduce their expectations for the boys, and it is long before the boys begin to operate at the expected level, which is reduced. So there's significance in this, and it's really quite important. As well as that, in my research studies and for books and things that I've done, I've talked to a number of women who were in the upper ranks of education leaders, who were telling me that their own children, after they entered kindergarten, were coming home and saying to their mothers, "I don't want to go to school anymore." Why not? Because school is for girls. Well, when children as young as 4 and 5 years old are telling their parents school is for girls, fine if you're a girl, but it's not so fine if you're a boy. And so we've got this whole issue of expectations being reduced. Anyway, Linda, I've sort of beat this one to death, so I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, I think the point is that there's unintended consequences. So we talked about the gender imbalance in the roles in teachers, which was the other way around quite a few decades ago. But it's not about male versus female, particularly. It's what are the unintended consequences when there isn't a same-sex role model in the school or in the classroom that boys can look up to or girls can look up to, and we're talking about the long-term unintended consequences in our case on our sons. So the other thing that happens is, of course, peer pressure, and for boys it's quite often, in the case of education, a negative peer pressure. So boys, as Jim, you just said, they kind of decide they don't want to go to school. So then that leads to they don't want to do homework. They don't want to go to music lessons. It's all, things that they think girls do. And they just want to be part of the gang. It's a peer pressure thing. Everybody wants to be part of the gang, and the gang doesn't do homework. Maybe I shouldn't say gang, the group of boys, the popular boys, or all the other boys around you aren't doing homework. So why should I be doing homework? And if I do, I don't want to tell my friends that I do homework, because then you won't be cool like the other boys. So, peer pressure is quite significant for boys.
But if the peer pressure is to do well, that's great. But if the peer pressure is to not do well, to not cooperate, to not make an effort, That's very negative, and it's very hard to change. After all, and this is true for all of us, not just for children, um, we don't want to lose our street cred. Street cred. Just so you understand what I'm saying. We don't want to lose that. I don't want to lose my status in the group in and that's part of what children deal with. And you can see it, for example, as was mentioned, on my speaking tours, I would speak very often to parents who talk to me about the fact that they couldn't get their sons to do homework. Not that the boys weren't capable of doing it. It's just that if they came and had their homework done, they lost their street cred. They weren't. They found themselves being heckled by the other boys, saying, "Ha ha! Look at this act there is doing this, doing or." Um, some of you may be old enough to remember the term about a brown bag. That's a student in usually in secondary school who's carrying his books around in a briefcase. You know you're in real trouble when they start saying, "Here he comes with two brown bags," and that's not brown like my name; it's brown like the color of my briefcase.
Oh, and of course, this leads to an overly gender-based curriculum. And again, it's all about unintended consequences. It's not anything about female teachers at all. It's about what happens in this kind of environment. So, and in your teaching method, they may decide, oh, there's only, one way to do things. They'll set up their classroom based on what it was like when they went to school, when they were little girls and when they went into the classroom. And so you end up with things that their teaching methods, their materials, their behaviors have expectations that are for little girls. And there's
I, I'm a
consequences to that.
I'm a parent of five children, three boys and two girls, and I obviously have a lot of studies, and I've worked in education and so on. The bottom line is, um, my my brain knows the information about what it's like to be a boy or girl, but I don't know. I know what it's like to be a boy because I was a boy and I'm still male. I don't really know what it's like to be a girl. And so, in terms of being a teacher, if you have a balance of male and female teachers, well, you have two different sets of experiences there. If you go in and it's all males or all females, well, that group of people really doesn't have a wide picture of this. And I'll just throw an aside in here. And that's true if, for example, someone is dealing with issues like alcoholism. I know it's nothing to do with overly feminized, but the point is, if you've never experienced it, you don't really know. Your brain knows, but you don't know. In here, you don't know. Anyway, I better let you move on here, Linda, or we're going to run out of time.
Yeah.
Don't let me lose. Don't let me lose.
Well, I was going to turn over to you and talk about the study that you did that was part of Queen's University, showed that male and female teachers give a higher mark to girls or boys on average, because again, exactly what you're talking about. For me, as a girl, I know how I expect people to be, like children to behave, and you as a male expect children to behave another way, and you're okay with boys running around and have energy, and the way they want to read books that have male characters. It's
Yeah,
okay. You need a mix. Again, you need to balance your classroom, right? You
yeah,
can tell a story of the princess one day, but you got to tell a story about the hero the next day, whether it be Harry Potter or
yeah,
Frodo the Hobbit, or whatever stories that are male based and female based. You need a mix so they can see, hey, look, it really is great to strive and to do this. But um anyways, over to the study that was very interesting study at Queen's University they did for the Ontario Secondary Teachers Federation, showing that male and female teachers give higher
yeah.
marks to the boy or the
Well,
girls. That was interesting.
the reality is that Queen's University did study for OSSTF, the Teachers Federation, and they looked at one of the things they looked at was the grades that students were presented with. Now, back in the old days when we had grade 13 exams, and those were all done with student numbers and so on, papers were marked by teachers marking these papers who I couldn't tell who had written it. And boys did reasonably well. In fact, they probably did better than girls did in that time period. All right, that's now been shifted. And so these papers are all marked by the teacher who teaches the students. And what's happened is, and this is what the Queen study showed, they gave teachers papers to mark, and the papers, so some of the papers had male names, boy names on them, and some had girl names. But the teachers would mark the same paper with a boy's name and a girl's name, same paper, and the girls' paper would get a higher grade. Now, I'm not saying the same teacher marked both papers, but the point is they did thousands of these studies of these papers, and consistently the girls were getting higher grades. The papers with girls' name on them were getting higher grades than the same paper with a boy's name on it. So that's really, really, really critical. You haven't read about that. You haven't seen anything about it. I know about it because I was working with Queens at the time. And that was what was done there. Now, to that study was replicated in the US. It was replicated in the UK, and I had access to both of those because I worked in the UK for a while. And they had exactly the same issue, that same piece of work, graded for a male, graded for with a female name on it, got a higher grade with the female name. So that goes back to this whole idea. Not that I'm not saying that the teachers were being intentionally unfair. It was just the reality that we have expectations that we've built up over how boys will do and how girls will do. And boys are at a major disadvantage right now. Not a good time to be born a boy. Sorry to say that, but really tough. It really is. I can say that about my grandchildren. Not a good time to be born a boy.
No, it's definitely not. No. And I think you had a similar experience, but from a male teacher in the UK when you talked to him about some students there you were working with, and the male teacher thought that your student that you were working with was doing great, and he couldn't even read. And I think that was your experience. And until you actually sat down with a teacher and got the student's marks, and that was a different story. And turns out that it's referring to both male and female and the unintended consequences. And yes, definitely it's with the higher gender of female teachers, it does create an issue for boys. And then if we want to just talk a bit about some sort of facts in the Ontario system, the EQAO testing that they do in Ontario from 2014 to 2019 in grade 3. As you know, there's the grade 3 and grade 6 testing that all our kids have to take in the school system. Pardon me. Girls outperform boys by 8 to 10% in reading and 11 to 13% in writing. That is huge. Especially, at that age, to not be able to read that well is a huge problem, as we've talked about before in our podcast. And then we get to grade 6, it's the same thing again. It's 8 to 10% points in reading. The girls are ahead of boys, and 13 to 17% in writing. And then the other one in when they get to secondary school, they have to pass this OSSLT, which is the Ontario Secondary School Literary Test, to make sure that they can read before you get your high school diploma. And 81% of girls passed, and only 75% of boys passed. And this creates a 6% difference. And that's,
But this is particularly significant because when I talk to people who are in charge of this kind of thing, and it's largely females, they say, no, we meet all kids' needs. Well, the interesting thing is that if these figures were reversed, and boys were outperforming girls. And the argument is back in the 1980s, that was the argument that boys were outperforming girls. Well, we made dramatic changes. We went through all kinds of changes and changes in hiring, changes in expectations, changes in requirements for qualifications, and so on. That was when boys were perceived as doing better than girls. Now, if girls are doing better than boys, no, everything's fine. We meet all kids' needs. Well, sorry, but as a parent and a grandparent, we need to be concerned about these issues, and that's what you and I are talking about, Linda. We're trying to get dads, if you'd like, but parents in general,
Mhm.
to recognize that things need to be done. Some things need to be done. We need to change this. Um, the system is overly feminized, and it's handicapping boys significantly, not just a little bit, significantly.
Yeah, and I think it's important when you go to talk to the teacher and to find out how your son's doing, you need to probe a bit more. Find out, well, he's doing okay. Well, how's his reading? And like, how's his behavior in the classroom? Do you have any other concerns? Things like that to try and get beyond just, well, Joey's doing fine. Well, we need more than that. We need to kind of find out what the teachers are thinking and what's going on with boys. Um, but what's interesting is boys do learn much differently than girls. And
And I'm going to interrupt here.
yeah,
The key to this is they don't learn differently necessarily because of biology. It's because we socialize our boys from the time they're born differently than we socialize our girls. Now, I make that statement, and I'm going to have parents saying, no, that's not, I don't do that. I treat them all equally. We still socialize them differently. And I'm talking not only as parents, but also in terms of the uh, whole society issue. So, for example, you know, uh, children come home from school, or children, yeah, they come home from school, and the parents have different tasks for them to do. Well, I'm thinking of my brother-in-law who the, the one boy and two girls. They come home from school, and the girls uh, do things like reading or needlework or whatever. I'm not making this up. This is the absolute truth. And but the boy plays ball hockey with dad in the yard. Well, it's completely, you're teaching those two children indirectly. You're teaching them completely different approach to um, learning and what's important and values, all kinds of things. You don't mean to. You're not doing it on purpose, but you are doing it. So now I'm going to tell one of my favorite stories. Sorry about this.
no, go ahead.
Boring.
We're here to hear your
my
experience.
favorite story. Here I was visiting a friend in Florida, as it turns out, and I went into a discount store and I was looking at items that were for sale, thinking I'll buy these for my grandchildren. I've got a flock of grandchildren too. So anyway, I saw basketballs on sale, and I know my granddaughters well enough to know they wouldn't be keen on basketballs, but the boys would be. So I got a couple of basketballs. I looked around the store, I couldn't find anything that I thought the girls would really like. And then I saw the book rack, and I thought, I know what I'll get. I'll get them books. They'll like that. And then finally, the light bulb went off in my head, and I said, Jim, give your head a shake. You even wrote a book about this. And that's a book that says we are gearing our girls up to small motor activities and things like reading. And we're gearing our boys to large muscle activities and things like basketball and so on. When the children are in school, the value is placed on reading and things of that nature, small muscle activities. There are no values placed on, I'm going to come into my classroom bouncing a basketball. So I was reinforcing this gender difference, if you'd like, that was going to handicap my grandsons. advantaged by granddaughters, fine. Handicapped my grandsons, not so fine. Anyway, um, if we look at this chart that's here, I'll turn it over to you, Linda, and we got to keep moving, right? You've got me out of control here, so.
Well, I would just say that, Jim, we like your stories because I think it's important that we understand the theory and the facts so that we know what we're stating, it's accurate, and there's been studies and proof to what we're saying. But the stories that you can provide to us really help us out because I'm a very practical person, being an accountant, and it's, the theory, the facts, give me those, but then how do I apply them? And that's what you're telling us, Jim. As parents, we're unconsciously doing it and we're creating unintended consequences. So this is where we need to have different expectations for our boys, or at least higher expectations or equal to what we're expecting our girls to do. But if we look at the chart, the learning approach, this goes with what you were suggesting, Jim, because of how we raise our kids. Boys learn more by hands-on. They need to be physically engaged and to help them stay focused. And where girls, on the other hand, they're happy to sit there and listen and read and discuss and sit still. It's not something that boys want to do or like to do, and that has an impact on how, the classroom teaching has an impact on how they learn. If they're looking for some kind of hands-on activity and you're supposed to be sitting and listening and writing quietly, it's not going to work. And then strength areas, boys learn using visual skills, with diagrams, maps, building, mechanical reasoning. As some of us know, we're in the car with our husbands and we're trying to navigate, and it's not going too well. We have Google Maps now, but in the days of reading maps, yes. Maybe that's just me personally. Where girls
No,
are better.
I can agree with the male end of it. I can agree with the
Yeah.
husband end of it.
Yeah, why can't you read the map?
Right.
Um, yeah, where girls are better, again, verbal and auditory skills. So, they're good at getting up and doing presentations and chatting, or boys want to, get right down in there and do it. As we know, I had a son and they like to play in the mud. And then our motivational style, boys learn by competing. And I think that's partly because we have them out there doing sports and things. And so they like to compete and they like to challenge each other and they like to have a goal. What's the purpose? Why am I doing this? What's my goal? My goal is to win. Where girls are learning through collaboration, they build relationships, they work in groups. Um, so it's a different way of thinking. So if you have a teacher that is female and that it focuses on being a female, they're looking for collaboration. And meanwhile, you see boys competing with each other, you kind of wonder, well, that's not what I asked you to do. But that's how boys work based on how our society is functioning. Um, then we have risk-taking behavior. Boys like to take risks, try things out. They're looking, if you give them an assignment, they want to try things out physically. Does this work? No, that didn't work. Let's try something else. Oh, that didn't work. Oh, this works. Sort of trying and through trial and error, where girls like to be very cautious and precise. They want to make sure they've got the right answer before responding. And I can tell you that's true as a female, and maybe, not all females. But I know I didn't want to raise my hand until I was sure I had the right answer. So my hand never went up very often, dare I say. And then I think you have a story there, Jim.
I do, but I better keep quiet. I think I'm sorry. I think of myself in chemistry class in grade 12, and uh, being asked a question by the teacher, and I stood up, gave the answer, and then realized it was wrong and corrected the answer before the teacher had a chance to. And the teacher said to the group, "Brown, how is it that you always manage to get the answer wrong the first time?" It was like, because I'll give that a try and that one didn't work. So let's whatever. Oh, yeah. I was willing to take the risk. Yeah. And then once I realized that wasn't right because it didn't make sense, then I corrected it. So yeah, we're different, no doubt about it.
Yeah, I'm sure in our audience we they could probably give us lots of stories as well. I'd be free to, share those. Send us an email. Tell us some of your stories and your experiences.
Yeah.
And of course, the last one is feedback. Boys they need immediate, you know, feedback, and it has to be concrete. They want to see that they're making progress.
Yeah.
What do you mean I did it wrong? Tell me why. Tell me what the issue is. Explain it to me. Um, and girls, you need to give them more. They work by encouragement and praise. No, you're doing a great job. This is really good. Doesn't necessarily work for the boy. Well, what am I doing well? I want to know. What can I change? What can I make better?
Very good. Very good.
So I don't know if
That's
you
really
have anything more to add,
no,
Jim.
only that uh, we need to keep this in mind. And it's not, again, this is not what we're talking about in terms of differences. It's not biological differences we're talking about. It's it's the experiences that we have before we go to school, that we have in school, and so on. And it's exacerbated by the whether or not we have male or female teachers. And ideally, we would have some type of balance. And unfortunately, increasingly, we don't have that balance. Move along. Here we go. I'm doing my best.
Okay, you're doing a great job, Jim. We like your stories, and keeps us lively, and like I say, helps us see things. So we're going to stop there for today because we're trying to keep our podcast to, we don't want to bore you for an hour. So so we're going to bring part 2 next time. So join us for helping boys achieve in our overly feminized education system, part 2. And there we're going to talk about what are the consequences. This stuff is real, and we can tell stories about it, we can laugh about it, we can see what's happening, and we see why. But what happens if we don't fix this? And that's what we want to talk about next time. What are the long-term consequences for our sons? How serious are they? And what are the results? And so if you want to find out, you're going to have to join us for our next podcast.
Super. Well done. I like it. Thank you, Linda.
Okay, thank you, Jim. We'll see you all next time. Bye for now.
Bye bye.